Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Lisa. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
Yeah, Lisa, this is a subject we have not really covered on the podcast yet, and I'm excited for it. But like always, we'll have to hold on for 1 second. Let us get to know you. What's your background, work history, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yes. Hey, everybody. My name is Lisa Heiss, and I'm a UX and behavioral design specialist. I've been in this field for a while now, and in 2021 founded Uxcelerate, where basically I'm helping SaaS startups to build better products and use behavioral design, data, and strategy to do so.
I love it. That's amazing. So, we're obviously going to talk about behavioral design, how that shapes B2B content that actually works. That's kind of the key here.
Yeah.
But let's catch the audience up to speed. And by audience, I really mean me. Let's catch me up to speed. What is behavioral design, especially to marketers that may not be as familiar with that term? Like, how do you define that?
I would say behavioral design is basically behavioral science and UX design having a baby. If you could imagine it that sense of like, first of all, you do want to understand what drives human behavior. And as the word design already says, then you got to go apply it. So basically, what we do here a lot is like we try removing friction, add motivation, create certain nudges that basically feel natural, where you can help people to be guided in certain directions. And yeah, in a marketing aspect, I'd say there is a bunch of these things that we can like apply in terms of how we frame choices, saying, okay, we want to add social proof in some aspects, how we structure things. And yeah, essentially what you see all is laid out for you to be able to like take action on it and to make it as engaging as possible.
I love that. So when we're talking about content, content and campaigns or content marketing, how does behavioral design actually move the needle and make and impact the results? And maybe any examples you could share about that?
Yeah, I could definitely share my own example because I've been on LinkedIn also for a while. And one of the things I realized, and I think I'm not the only one having that problem, but is that I started publishing a lot, like talking about my offers of what I was doing. And it did become some traction. But one thing I realized is like, okay, this was interesting, but people weren't taking as much action as I would have liked them to. And actually, when I was thinking about it in a way of behavioral design and trying to apply it in that sense, I was actually realizing that I was describing a lot what I do, showcasing very little of what it gets people, right? So I think one thing is nice for everybody to throw around the fancy term of behavioral design that, for example, you first need to understand before you can do anything with it. But then also that idea of like, okay, how does this help me, right? So you are a company with problem A, you have a certain challenge, and you actually want to know, okay, like what could I do to get to that dream result? And once I started doing that, and I basically like started in engaging with case studies and like really trying to lead people through that process, all of a sudden the interest rate got a lot higher. And just I think that's probably the easiest example I could think of.
I love that. And it's really true. I found this with my own content. The more tactical we get, like you're talking about, here are the results of what behavioral design can and does do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of content people latch onto because in order to share tactical advice, typically it requires that someone has some expertise and experience there. And especially with all this AI information out there, that information is vague, unexperienced, and regurgitated.
Yeah.
And I think behavioral design actually kind of bucks that trend and kind of helps prove that maybe you actually know what you're talking about a little bit. And I think there's some good things there.
100%.
So going on to the next question, something that's really interesting for me. Where are people getting this wrong? Like what are we doing wrong that we all need to just take a deep breath and fix it and change it how we do it?
100%. I think the previous example I gave is a little bit touching around that topic already. Basically, like we are all caring a lot about what we're saying and not about how it's perceived, right? So a lot of the times I talk to different, also other behavioral scientists and people in their space that are such experts and that care so much about their opinion and like what they could publish, that they sometimes forget that we are the only ones that have that expert lens on. Sometimes for somebody to understand it, even their customer, it's a little bit hard, right? Because we are using that many terms, but also in the same aspect of like, how is a post published? So if it is really messy and you're putting out there all the studies that you have and it feels really jargon heavy, and for me, just generally hard to read and uninteresting for my life because I don't really know what that gets me, then all of a sudden you're missing that potential of like actually connecting, right? So I feel like even if it's something super simple as just cleaning up the language, maybe even seeing how your clients speak about the problems and using that language instead of your way of explaining it, I think that's been super helpful for me to just really get down of like, okay, what are founders thinking, what's their problems all day, and speaking in that language. And all of a sudden it resonated a lot more, right? And I think another thing is maybe putting a lot about the solution part and not much how you got there. So a lot of the times I feel like we have these expert opinions and we have these cool things that we want to offer in terms of solutions and benefit, but then the interesting part, and I've had this in some recent examples, is like, how did you get to this problem? How did you solve it? And why was it interesting enough to solve in the first place? And the minute you explain that, first of all, sticks in people's brains. And secondly, it's just so much more connectable, so much more something that they could go on and take action upon because they understand that you've been there. You've basically had the same problem. And yeah, you've somehow figured out a way to fix those.
I love it. So when we're talking about behavioral design and you use this interesting term, behavioral scientists,
Yes.
like immediately I'm like, awesome. Okay. When you use the word scientist, there's data, there's nerdiness, there's all sorts of stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
What data do you look at and how do you test behavioral design to know if it's working, know if it's not? How might that different from what like a traditional content marketer might look at?
Yeah.
What are the things that you're studying and understanding there?
100%. I'd say it comes down to two levels, right? So first of all, you got the data, which is kind of the solid part of did something happen. So I don't think the data itself changes as much. It sometimes is more the reasoning of why are we getting to a certain outcome. So let's say we look at how many clicks were taken after posting XYZ or after launching that new landing page and how many signups that we get. Basically, that's the outcome. But now that we have this result, going about it and like dissecting it differently and saying, okay, what could be the causes for this outcome? I think there's a bunch of frameworks that we could go through as well that kind of propel people to take action. And a lot of the time it's easier to look and the other way around, to look from back and actually move through these steps and say, oh, that's why we didn't have enough motivation. Oh, the people weren't able to do it because we didn't explain well enough what are the next steps, right? And once you have these frameworks, it's pretty easy to come up with good reasoning. So sometimes I feel like the problem is just looking at a conversion rate or looking at at the impressions. It's nice, but it doesn't give you the why. And like if you can dive a little bit deeper into the behavior, then it feels like something that you can actually improve a bit easier, right?
I like that. So when you look at behavioral design, specifically when it comes to content, and this is a little bit of a curveball question, so I apologize. Design versus content.
Yeah.
How are those equal partners in behavioral design? Do you skew more towards one or the other? Is that even a part of the equation?
Yeah.
What does that all look like?
Interesting question. I'd say they go hand in hand, right? The design is nice, but in and of itself, it doesn't do that much a lot of the times. That's why I even got into it. Like before doing any of the behavioral science stuff, I was a UX designer and I figured out that, okay, we've designed all these beautiful things, but I can't really explain if people are taking action and we can't really measure it. We don't really know. So that got me started in the first place of like, okay, we actually have maybe a bit of a gap here between what looks nice and what is actually taking people to the next step. So I think they definitely go hand in hand because obviously without design that helps sometimes in terms of getting an easier understanding and taking people to the next level in a chronological order, then at the same time you have the context of like, okay, if the content isn't right, if it's not speaking to me, then we still have a problem, right? Then it can look all that beautiful, but if they don't, I always say it's almost like you were in a crowd and somebody is shouting. If they're not calling any names, nobody feels like, oh, that's for me. And if that isn't happening, then I feel the design part is nice, but it's actually still not relevant to you. So I'd argue it definitely goes hand in hand. But yeah, no, you can't really cut out one or the other.
I love it. I now have a mental model of like, where's Waldo in my head with the shouting in a crowd. I think that's super cool. Yeah. Any shortcuts or models that you use when you're really building content that can kind of help you almost kickstart and have like a much better baseline and do better from the very get-go?
100%. So I think the BJ Fogg model is something that probably is very well recognized. And just that idea of like having motivation, ability, and prompt, I think that comes in, first of all, it's very easy to understand, but also it comes in handy to just double check that, right? So if people aren't taking action, did I actually help them? Did I remove that friction? Am I maybe missing some cues? Is there some motivational gap that we have for the moment that maybe my content is talking about all of this stuff, but I haven't put the call to action of like, hey, download this free thing or do something like that, right? And I think something that also is related is BJ Fogg is basically talking about tiny habits. So that idea of like being able to like anchor it to something that already exists and not make the spike between something that you're doing and the next thing you're expecting them to do that big. So maybe instead of like your content call saying, okay, book a strategy call just because you read a post of mine, that seems maybe like something of, God, I got to take a lot of action. What if it's not worth my time? Maybe I don't really want to do this. But if you put, for example, that's why now at the minute, the what's it called? Lead magnets and LinkedIn are working so well. Download this template, look at this free value, and then you feel like you got to know me already. And just with that, you can take the action of the next step because it doesn't feel that big.
Yeah, I like that. That's really cool. So let's say someone wants to get better at behavioral design. They want their content to be better. They want to help people understand the next step. Any like easy tips or tricks or advice that you can give anyone saying, okay, we're going to go, I'm going to get off this podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm going to improve it. What's a cool place to start and what's some tips?
100%. So I think there is three things that come to mind. The first one being like, okay, really think about it as if you were kind of the person that you're talking to. So if you're the marketer and you're selling it to the SaaS company, okay, what is the SaaS company's lens of it? Think of it in the deepest level possible in terms of what are their daily problems? Where do I prompt them? Where do they maybe realize they have a problem? Where would they start looking? So really like getting in their head and getting in next level deep in terms of making it like a custom journey or like something that you could essentially like follow them and get to know them as if they were your best friend. I think that's a good starting point. And then the other one is a little bit of like, okay, if you do become aware of the aspect of friction and motivation, like what causes friction, what is maybe something complex, and how can I reduce it? So if next time you look at your long post and you're like, this has been amazing, but maybe it's hard to read for somebody, maybe it's easier if I just put this into a, I don't know, 10 phrase framework where they would get that value a lot quicker. And where maybe for me it's harder to actually write this, but it definitely gets to the point very easy, and it also gets people motivated to take action. And the same thing, one thing I've seen about LinkedIn and content is just clarity, like being able to say, okay, we have one offer, we talk about one problem, and we have one solution. Like going in this variation, it just then makes it so much easier. Yeah, it takes, in a world that's already very busy, it takes out that additional friction and like makes it very easy in your page at least to get to the point, to get started.
I love it. Okay. Not going to lie, I'm not an expert just yet, but I feel like I have taken the one-on-one course on behavioral design. I think this is amazing. Lisa, thank you for the insights. If anyone listening to this podcast wants to reach out, connect with you and reach out online, where and how can they find you?
Yes, there's two sites. I would say on LinkedIn, I'm active a bunch and under Lisa Heiss. And also I got a website, which is called lisaheiss.com, where you can find even more material, look at the work and like figure out how it could serve you in the best way.
I love it. Perfect. Anyone listening, we will link to all of Lisa's profiles in the show notes below. So you just have to click on it. Lisa, again, thank you so much for time and the insights today.
Thank you.